Today we are going to be taking this raw, beautiful photo and turning it into this beautiful photo. This photo was submitted to me by Terry Goins, and I love doing videos where I edit your guys' car photography, and this is another one of those episodes. So feel free to subscribe if you enjoy this video and you want to see more content like this. I love teaching you guys everything I know about Lightroom and editing and car photography and the business of car photography. So let's dive into this. We won't be using any presets. We're going to go from start to finish, and I'll try and break down as much of my process as possible. So let's start up at the top there in the settings. Got a shutter speed of 1/1600. His aperture is f2.2 and his ISO is at 100. So something you can see here is that he's actually using a 35mm lens with the ability to do 1.4 and chooses not to, which I respect, because typically when you close down your shutter a little bit, you get a slightly sharper image. So great settings, good job on capturing this photo. And if you look, as the first thing that I always do is I adjust my crop. You can see he's even putting the car on the rule of thirds with the Sunoco logo there also on a rule of thirds. So it's actually a really beautifully composed photo, and it will sit really nicely on Instagram as well, as it's really good composition. So we're just going to try and straighten this out as best as we can to make sure that the car is level and the scene is level. All right, so from here, I'm actually going to make sure to click on and make sure chromatic aberration and profile correction is on. You can see that you get a little bit extra vignetting if you have that on. So we're just going to do that to take away vignetting. That's in the lens corrections tab here. So as I look and assess this photo, it's very flat. Obviously the sun isn't popping. There's not a lot of directional sunlight. It's a flat day. So I'm actually going to try and warm this photo up and bring in some extra dynamics, so to speak. So to start, I'm going to bring up my exposure to make sure the car is looking good. We're going to bring down the highlights, and I'm always looking up in this top left corner to make sure that I'm keeping everything exposed properly. So I might even bring that down a little bit to make sure we've still got the sky. I'm going to bring my shadows up, and when it comes to automotive photography and bringing my shadows up, I'm always looking in the deep dark areas like here, and specifically around the wheels, because we want to make sure to bring out the details in the dark areas. So, and don't worry if it looks kind of flat as you bring the shadows up, because there's several ways that we can bring back the contrast. Here on the whites, we're going to hold the slider, hold option, and if you go all the way to the right, you can see that's blowing out details in the white. So I want to make sure to retain all the details there, and maybe even drag those down to make sure we're getting all the details in the sky. We're going to do the same thing with the blacks. Start dragging, then hold option, and we're going to drag to the left, and everything that goes black is going to be completely blacked out in the image. So you can see if I release option, we have a lot of darks there. So a part of the way that I like to edit my photos is by maximizing the dynamic range that these cameras have to offer. So here I'm just going to drag till my eye thinks it looks good, but making sure that I'm not losing too much details in the darks. It doesn't matter if we lose all the details, because you don't really care to see in the blacks all that much. So this bit you can kind of do to taste. That looks pretty good. From here, I'm going to bring up the dehaze, because this is another way that you can add contrast in your image. You can hold option and see what that does to your blacks as well. So if you want to dehaze, you can, or add contrast, you can, but if you hold option on contrast, it doesn't actually do anything. So it doesn't affect too much. If we hold the blacks, we'll bring back some of the details there. So just with touching our tone, like our basic tones up here, we have a pretty good contrasty image with all the dynamic range being utilized from that camera. So now I'm going to go into the tone curve, and I'm going to actually see if we can save the sky a little bit and bring some of the softness back into the photo. And then when it comes to the mid-tones of the curve, I usually like to pop these up, because that's tends to be where the car sits in the frame. Here, we're just popping that up to make sure that the car is going to be exposed properly. And then on the bottom third, we're going to bring this back down just to taste, to make sure that we have a good enough contrast in there as well. And I'm not actually loving how it kind of makes the blacks look a little mushy there. So I might adjust some of these a little bit to make sure it looks a little better, because we can use masks, which we're going to get into later, to make sure that car pops and stands out. Maybe we can add a touch of a fade here by dragging that bottom button up, and you could even push that to the right, and it does some fun fadey things too. So now we've adjusted our basic exposure and we've used a bit of our tone curve to add some style to the photo. And now we're going to adjust some of the colors. So a big thing for me in automotive is oftentimes I look at the ground and it tends to be gross colors in the cement. So I'm actually going to do my best to take out some of these gross colors. So if we come down to our color mixer, part of what I'm going to start doing is it tends to be in the yellows is where there's a lot of nasty colors, and sometimes in the oranges as well. So we can see, yeah, it's a lot of the oranges are down in the cement area there. But what else is that impacting? I need to make sure that I'm not taking away too many colors from other places. So I'm going to drag that down a little bit. And again, once we get into masking, we'll do some more. Aquas tend to land in windshields. Yep, you can see here, if I drag that down, it's going to land in the windshields, but it's not even affecting the color of the car a whole bunch. And then we have a lot of blues happening. So I'm just going to drag those down a little bit as well. And we're going to adjust a lot of these colors later. The sky tends to have a lot of blue in the luminance. So if I want, I can bring that down, but we're not going to touch that just yet. What I want to show you is in the color grading. This part is where I bring a lot of my personal style into editing in the color grading. Because even if you really desaturate an image, in color grading, you can bring your style or your favorite colors into it. So this is where I do 220 in my shadows with a saturation of 10. And this is only affecting the dark parts of the image. Then when you go to your midtones, this little nubbin here is the midtones. I actually don't do any colors in the midtones. I just bump the luminance a little bit. And then in the highlights, I go 35 in the hue with a saturation of 10. And that's just to get me started. Then you can blend those colors together better, or you can drag the balance left, which is closer to the shadows, and right, which is closer to the highlights. And you can see that that gives you either a warm tone or a cooler tone. All right, so sharpening, as we move down, we're just gonna hit Option. We're gonna start dragging the mask, then hit Option. And as you can see, the farther I go to the right, the less white is appearing. So when you are all the way left on your masking, you're actually sharpening everything in your image. So you wanna start dragging that mask over to just sharpen the parts of the image that you want. And in this case, this looks really good because we're sharpening the car, the Sunoco logo, and the stadium around it, but we're taking away the sharpening on, say, the side of the car and the panels, which we don't really want to add noise in that area. So we're just going to drag up the masking to about there, and that looks pretty good. At this point, if you had a noisy image, which we don't because he did his settings correctly, you could denoise this image and it will make it look really good. People have different opinions on when to denoise in the process. I haven't found that it affects it overly much where you do it in the process. If you guys have feedback on that, please leave it in the comments down below for us to learn from you as well, because this is a community of people. If you wanted to do a more stylized edit, you can add some grain. I'm starting to enjoy adding subtle bits of grain to take away the digital look of photos. So we're just gonna add a touch of that. So if you've made it this far, you've made it to the best part of the video, because this is where we start to add style and really start to make this car pop. Masking is the most critical part of any photo. If you are just getting this far, then you are only using half of what Lightroom has available to you. So first and foremost, I want to actually warm this photo up. So we're gonna go up to our temperature dial and we're gonna warm it up a little bit, because I want this to look more like sunset kind of vibes. I think there's a really cool opportunity as we see the light kind of popping up in the top left-hand corner there. So I want to utilize the direction of that light to make this a warmer photo. To start, we're going to hit M on the keyboard, which brings up your linear gradient. You can see on the side here, there's the shortcuts for some of these. I use linear gradients a ton. So we're just gonna hit M and we're just gonna drag it up towards the middle of the car. You can move it left, right, and you can see how it's gonna adjust that. But if you hold Shift, it'll give you a perfectly straight line. So I'm just gonna drag that up to the middle of the car there. And we're going to bring down the exposure. The objective of this is we are trying to draw the attention towards the car. We want the car to be the brightest part and the most standout part of this image. So we're just gonna drag that down to taste. A big way that I navigate that is I look up in the top left corner in the navigator to see what it's doing. So if I click that on and off, I just want it to be subtle. I don't want this to be too overdone, but it is a pretty standard practice in automotive photography to draw your attention to the car. So we're gonna do that there. The next mask we're going to do is we are going to create a new mask on our subject. So we're gonna hit select subject here, and you can see it doesn't actually do a great job because there's a lot going on. So we're gonna subtract objects. We're gonna take this away. We don't want that. And we might need to subtract with a brush as well. And we're just going to take away some of this extra stuff. We just want to impact the car so we can make the car stand out here. So now when I'm doing a car mask, one thing I love to do is actually use the curve tool instead of the exposure. There's nothing wrong with using the exposure and adding contrast and those kinds of things, but I find that if I use the curves tool, I can bring and add highlights in and midtones and then use the balance on the bottom half of the curve to make it sit really naturally as well. And I might actually add a little bit of contrast here to make sure that it's sitting nicely. But before and after, you can see it's just adding a nice subtle pop there. Next thing we're going to do, we are going to select the sky and we're going to try and warm this up. I want to make this look like a bit of a sunset, so we're going to darken that. We're going to try and warm it up a little bit. That looks kind of cool. Maybe add some pinks because it's sunset. Now, another thing I love doing is if we hit Shift M, it's going to give us a radial gradient. Because it looks like we have light coming up here, I'm actually going to add a cheeky pop of light that looks like it's coming through this window, I guess. So we're going to add exposure, make it look like the sun's popping through there. We're going to add a bunch of warmth to make it look like the sun. And then we're going to go down to the dehaze and we're going to drag that to the left to make it look a little bit more misty, so to speak. And then if we go into saturation, let's do that to make it pop. That looks like the sun's trying to pop through. We could even add some in the curves there. Drag that down to make sure it's not overexposing it even. Now, one thing that I'm noticing as I warm this photo up is I'm actually losing some of the colors in this car here. So I want to maybe add a new mask. We'll select subject. It's going to do the same thing it did last time, but the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to hit Option, and it opens up this intersect button. So we're going to click that. We're going to intersect it with a color range tool. Then we're going to click on the side of the car because we want to pick that car specifically and hopefully pull out the color of it. And we're going to refine that mask to hopefully just be on the car, which is doing a pretty good job of there. You can refine it either way, but we're going to refine it to the left and see how it's picking out just the car mostly there. And then from here, if I hit O will show you what your mask is giving you. And I want to actually pull up the saturation so we can bring back that, what is this usually called? Like green metallic jade or something like that. So we're going to try and pull that out and make the car stand out. We could even maybe add a touch of exposure there. It's a pretty cool image. If I look up in the top left corner, my eye is drawn to the car first. We've gone from a pretty flat looking image here to a pretty warm image where the car is really popping out. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, what else you would do, what you maybe did or didn't like about this photo. If you guys are struggling with your edits, of course, you can subscribe here. I also sell car photography specific presets that don't affect everything. So let me actually showcase something for you here. If you buy my fall presets, for example, you can change just the light settings without changing the color settings. Or if you like the contrast in the image and you want to change the colors, you can just scroll over these and change it just to different fall colors. Now, I have a whole preset pack called the Toolkit where you can do this with all of the settings. So you can do this with your light settings, you can do it with your curves settings and add different curves. It's pretty cool what you can do. And then I have several different colors and adjustments that you guys can do that will tweak this completely. But I do appreciate your time. I hope that you guys learned a little something from this video as well. And stay tuned for more like this. And I do hope I'll see you in the next video. Peace.